I think that we can start this meeting. My name is Andrzej Malinowski. I'm a Polish lawyer, and since 3 years with my friends I organize in Sołek Academic Center sessions on natural law, and the sessions during the pandemic are online, and I think it's a good opportunity to meet with foreign professors, foreign and Polish point of view, of course. And today our guest is Professor Ferenc Hörcher, who is a professor of political thought and wrote a book on Prudentia Juris towards the pragmatic theory of natural law. This lecture will last 45 minutes, and then will be a session of question and answers. And Professor, please, I give you a voice.
Thank you, Andrzej. Thank you, Tomasz, for this invitation. I'm very happy to contribute to your series. It's a very good opportunity for me to meet you and all those who are interested in such a abstract subject as we are talking about today, or tonight rather. So I have got some slides. If you don't mind, I would share it with you. If I find it. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
So the topic for us today is political prudence and natural law. And what you see here is an emblem of prudence, which is taken from Ripa's Iconologia, which is perhaps the most famous, the most well-known book of emblems. Emblems were the traditional way of visual presentation of abstract terms, categories, and concepts. And prudence is here represented by this two-faced figure. You realize that she has two faces, and she is looking into this mirror to get self-knowledge. And there is the serpent in her other hand, which makes her knowledgeable. And there is this deer, again, which is important for a virtue of moderation and self-discipline. So that's a traditional way of presenting prudence. But today I will connect the concept of prudence to natural law. And this is my offer for you tonight. I will start with a short reflection on natural law in the time of a culture war, which is, I think, the present moment. That's how one can characterize it. And then I will present natural law, introduce the concept itself. Then I will introduce prudence, both conceptually and historically. And then I will try to connect the two concepts, see how they relate to each other, what are the relationships between them. And then I will also connect the two of them to conservatism as a political ideology or a political philosophy. So let's start with natural law in the context of culture war. Of course, the concept of culture war is taken over, or a mirror translation of the German term Kulturkampf from the late 19th century, when the developing German Reich and its powerful leader Bismarck was kind of waging war against the influence of Rome and the Pope, and that was the first time that they reflected on it and called it culture camp. Of course, there were debates between different religions, denominations earlier as well, but the term itself comes from that time. And I think that the fact that we live in a time of culture war in the West or in Europe generally, we can say that to understand natural law is a bit more difficult for us. Why? Because I think the concept became politicized for the following reason. All the major issues of the present day culture war are closely connected to the concept of nature in its general term or to human nature in particular. I have in mind the problems around or the debates around gender and social concept of gender, about the problem of abortion or euthanasia, but also the political debates around what consists, what a marriage or a family consists of, and also one can claim that the ecological crisis is closely connected to our concept of nature. So if we are talking about these issues, we cannot help to get involved, attached to one position or other in these debates, and that makes it more difficult to talk about it in a neutral fashion. A further issue that I would like to bring up to conceptualize or contextualize the problem is the basic tendencies of 20th century legal and political thinking. I presented here perhaps the most important debate from our perspective in the post-war period of the 20th century, the one between the American natural lawyer Lon Fuller and the British positivist thinker H.L.A. Hart. They represented in a very pronounced way the two major camps, so to say, who were fighting in this debate, or a series of debates, in fact. And apparently natural law did not come out in a good shape from that debate. And then there is a further point to be made, which is that in political philosophy we had one man show as well, with John Rawls and his theory of justice, which is one can claim a social contract type of liberal thinking, but one which is again quite far away from the natural law tradition. So all these aspects pushed the natural law, I would say, into the background. And that's the more interesting because after the Second World War, and because of the losses in human life, and also because of the genocide, a very important development was the birth of different international documents establishing human rights as a universal value. I have in mind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was processed or encouraged and helped to be born by Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of President Roosevelt, and the European Convention on Human Rights just a few years, just 2 years later. And one can ask the question, if we have got a universal concept of human rights, which is the fact by now, it's an established, accepted idea, but how can we establish it? How can we give a foundation to this idea without referring to natural law? There are some who claim that the concept of human dignity can take over the role from natural law, but it's just postponing the problem itself, because human dignity is not easily conceivable without contextualizing it in natural law itself. So that's still not an answer, I would say. And the last aspect why natural law is has a bad press these days is that different camps of left-wing intellectual circles attacked natural law. There was, first of all, a modernist criticism, like the one that Habermas, for example, represented, where natural law is attacked as something which has a theological foundation and as such has no place in our secular world, which has separated church and state. Or we can refer to the Marxist or critical legal studies criticism of the natural law, which claims that it's just an ideological cover up, and in fact it has nothing substantial to say. It's just an ideology to defend power interests. Then there is the postmodern criticism, like the one represented by Foucault or Derrida, that the idea of universal morality is untenable. It's a dogmatic claim which has no foundation. And finally, the post-colonial criticism claims that it's a smokescreen again, like in the Marxist criticism of white men in this case, instead of the capitalists. It's it's a means, help to defend the rights of the white rulers over anyone else. Okay, these are, Andrzej already referred to my first book, which dealt with the topic Prudence Juris, which is the jurisprudence in today's terminology, pragmatic theory of natural law. And this was published in 2000. And it was earlier my LLM thesis at the European Academy of Legal Theory. And it tried to connect natural law theory and American pragmatism. It was perhaps a bit courageous effort, but I found an overlap between the two, that for both of them, truth was something that comes out or grows out or can be covered from, discovered from and in action. So the activist dimension, the practical, pragmatic dimension was important for the classical natural law theory and for American pragmatism as well. And the second book is much more recent. It was published in 2020, and this is the main title is A Political Philosophy of Conservatism, but as you see, the subtitle is Prudence, Moderation and Tradition, and it tries to give both a conceptual history of prudence and argues that there is a way of defending conservatism with the help of prudence, and I will try to elaborate that point later on. So let's start with natural law. What is natural law? My inspiration came for understanding it from Gadamer's interpretation of Aristotle, and in particular Aristotle's natural law. because there you see in the first quote that I have got in blue, you will always see quotes from sources. So this quotation, the first one is referring to the fact that usually natural law is conceptualized as an absolutely unchangeable thing. But interestingly, partly because something absolute and unchanging belongs to the gods in the Greek context, you had to find something else for the human beings themselves who are not gods. And so if they have natural law, that sort of natural law should be conceptualized as changeable. So changeability and naturalness are the two dimensions that Aristotle associates with the human dimension of the natural law. And the claim is that it's natural in the sense that it's always a reaction to the nature of the thing that we are confronted with. So naturalness here means that the human agent is meeting or facing a situation which has got challenges, which needs ways to solve, and they react, or he or she reacts on that challenge, and that means that the first move is done by the thing itself, by nature itself, and we try to understand the message of it. And beside Gadamer, I also found important Leo Strauss' work on natural law. Gadamer and Leo Strauss both belong to the German cultural sphere, although Leo Strauss was a Jewish German thinker. And the interesting thing is that they both found natural law important, but they understood it in different ways. And Leo Strauss wanted to go back to the original sense of natural law as opposed to the modern concept of natural right, which he claimed was a misconceived or a corrupted sense of the term or the concept. And here you see his understanding of natural law. He claims that a good life requires that it should be lived in accordance with the natural order of things and of our being. So there is a hypothesis that individual life is a part of a larger order, a framework which directs the right, the proper, the good life, and that's what we have to take into account in our everyday action as well. And this good life also supposes a healthy soul. That's very important, that there is this spiritual dimension in his understanding of the concept. So it's not a biological functioning, but also a spiritual self, which is at stake here. Okay, so Gadamer and Strauss are perhaps two famous examples of how the concept is conceived in the 20th century. But I would encourage ourselves to go back to the classical authors like Aristotle and Aquinas and to understand natural law. And this is my description of it, by the way. It's just a formula. It's not strict enough, but I think it's useful for our discussion today. So I would suggest to understand natural law, the idea of natural law as an idea of a universal standard that can be used to test the validity or the truth of individual or particular judgments, like when we have a political debate, a moral dilemma, or a legal case, we have to make judgments, and we have to test whether our point of view is valid, it's truthful or not. And we can rely on natural law in that case as well. But we can also use it to test general norms of our political community, as well as we use it to judge the deeds and norms of others as well. Because, of course, it's a critical tool. It's always in comparison with something else that we use it, not for its own sake. And the idea is that its universality comes from the fact that all of us who will rely on are human beings. So remember Gadamer's interpretation of Aristotle, that there is a natural law for the gods and the one for the human beings. And not only for individual human beings, but human beings who live in community with others. That's very important, that natural law is a part of our communal life. And also it's help in intercommunal dialogues or communication. So it's in fact help for global problems, global debates. That was, of course, a shorthand thing, and we can return to it later, but just to give a general idea of what I mean by the term. And my main focus will be on prudence, because that's my major interest. As you saw in both of my books, I dealt with prudence. In the first one with legal prudence or jurisprudence, in the second one with political prudence. And actually I'm preparing a third volume, at least in my mind, of aesthetic judgment, judgment in the arts, because I think that there are very important similarities and of course some differences between these ways of prudence. Okay. Prudence is a virtue, and what is a virtue? I claim a virtue is embodied knowledge, a form of embodied knowledge, an attitude or rectitude, which means that it's something that is conditioned in us, something that we reflected on perhaps earlier, but something which became quite customary by now, which became a second nature for us. And it's the result of a long and partly unconscious learning process. So it can be an indirect influence on us that results in the virtue established in our moral makeup, in our character. And it cannot be learned like theoretical knowledge, even though I will claim that virtue is an intellectual virtue. In the Nicomachean Ethics, in the 6th book of it, Aristotle makes it very clear that you have to distinguish practical knowledge from theoretical knowledge, episteme, and also from wisdom, from Sophia. And that means that you cannot learn it conceptually or like in a schoolroom. You learn it by imitation most of the time. You try to be like someone else, the virtuous person, because he or she embodies for you the virtue itself. And so the way to learn it is to try to imitate the person. And virtues are conceptualized along different directions, and prudence, the virtue of prudence, belongs to the cardinal virtues. The cardinal virtues are identified as the main ones, or the principal virtues by Aquinas, Why? Because they are the ones that will really help us to find the right direction. So they are moral virtues, with the exception of prudence, which is both moral and intellectual virtue. And the cardinal virtues belongs to the tradition, to the ancient Greek and Roman tradition of philosophy, but it's taken over by Christianity, and Aquinas uses it for his own purposes. But that's the same with earlier church fathers. And the four cardinal virtues represent different moral virtues which are helpful in our moral life and in our practical life. Beside prudence, which is the rational moral virtues, so to say, but rational in a practical sense of the word. It's translated into English as practical wisdom or cleverness as well, to show that it has got a cognitive dimension as well as a practical dimension. But beside prudence, there are three other ones. The one which is concerned with our will is justice, because we will only be just if we really want to be just. That's the conception behind it. Then there is temperance, which helps to keep in control our passions, and fortitude, which helps us to fight, basically, in order to defend the values that we are standing for. And there is a famous 20th century legal scholar from Oxford, John Finnis, a Catholic thinker, who interprets Aquinas on the cardinal virtues, and this is his understanding of the four cardinal virtues. He claims that prudentia or prudence is about choices and the execution of choices, while justice is about dealing with others. Temperantia or temperance, moderation, is in integrating and governing one's desires by genuine reasons. So it's not just simply forceful pushing into the background our animal instincts, but rather to give genuine reasons for the control of them. And finally, the courage, fortitudo, which enables us to face down intimidating obstacles. So the ones that would not allow us to become ourselves. That's the function of courage, the virtue of courage, to encourage us to get over them. Okay, I think we have already talked about that, there is this rational dimension to prudence, and there is this dimension of the right appetite. You have to, in order to act correctly or properly, the virtue of prudence will show you the right direction of your actions. So it's a practical consideration or deliberation that it helps in, but it's also connected to a long-term strategic thinking. It's not just about the moment, it's about the long-term direction of your life, the right appetite. That's what is referred to here. And a specific aspect of prudence is the one that is used in politics. That's called political prudence or politicae phronesis. in Aristotle, who claims that it's a very important part. Why? Because for Aristotle, the human being is a political being. So if you need a human virtue, you need a virtue which is connected to the human being as a social or political animal, and that's politic phronesis. And that's taken over by Aquinas as well, who claims that prudence regards not only the private good of the individual, so it's not just a moral virtue, but it's also connected to the common good of the multitude, i.e. it's a political virtue as well. So the two things are not separated, they are connected to each other. As in Aristotle's theory, politics is in fact connected to ethics. The two things are not distinguished, as we will see in Machiavelli. In the case of political prudence, what is at stake is leadership. The political agent who can decide the fate of the community. Prudence is one of the ways that we explain why a ruler is accepted by the community. There are other ways to explain that. You can explain it by charisma, as Weber did, or by authority, as Gadamer does. But there is this prudential argument which says that, well, the most practically wise, the politically wisest agent, political personality will become the political leader in the community. At least that's the demand, that's the norm that we have to follow. And a short look at the historical background. According to Gadamer, in fact, they were the Romans who were very important in the development of the concept. Why? Because for the Romans, legal science was closely connected to the idea of prudence or phronesis, to practicality. It's not the Roman legal science does not understand itself as just a theoretical exercise, an abstract logic, so to say, but rather, and not even something that is connected to the high demands of Sophia, but a practical issue. You have to solve legal disputes. And that's why phronesis, the Greek term phronesis, is taken over and used by Roman legal science. And it's directed to the concrete situation, and that's where it finds its use. And in this respect, we can mention the art of the judge, the legal scholar's art, when it's most of the time the judge decides a case, determines a legal dispute. He needs a specific form of phronesis. That's the dikastike phronesis, the phronesis that you use to give a just decision, a just solution of the dispute. And it's important that it's not simply craftsmanship, it's not techne in Aristotle's terminology, it's practical wisdom. The craftsman, the knowledge of the craftsman, which characterizes the craftsman, is different from it in the sense that it's quite obvious. If you imagine a shoemaker, you know what he or she wants to make, and he also knows it when he starts to do it. While the judge does not know the end result when he sits there. It's in the process that the decision will be born. And that's one aspect that needs to be emphasized. Then another aspect is the issue of practical wisdom in the city, as far as political community or the common good of the polis is concerned. And there, Aristotle's example is Pericles. He was not particularly fond of him as a person, but he claimed that Pericles was a good leader. Why? Because he proved to be practically wise, because he knew what was good for himself as well as for the community. These are the two parts, you know, the moral and the political part, or if you want, the private and the public part of it. And then we have to mention Cicero, because Cicero is elaborating the concept of prudence the following way. He says that it has got three parts: memory, intelligence, and foresight. And these three aspects are represented in Titian's allegory of prudence that I use here as an illustration. Well, what are these three parts? Memory is the faculty which recovers the knowledge of things which have been. So you need to know even past events in order to confront your problem right now. You have to look back. That's why the old man is looking on the left. And then the middle-aged person represents the present moment. And intelligence. Intelligence is the character trait which perceives what exists at present. So again, what he wants to know is what is the case, what are the facts, what does the situation consist of. You always want this realistic approach in prudence. You don't want to fly away, so to say. You don't want to think about abstract ideas. You confront the present. And then the third aspect is foresight. You need to know what is going to happen before it does happen, in order to prepare for it. And that's the youthful guy doing on looking on the right. And I mentioned Machiavelli because he radically reinterprets the concept. In which way? Well, most importantly, he was a practical politician in Renaissance Florence. And as a practical politician, he was interested in how to get power, how to get power under control, and how to preserve power. And the most important difficulty to keep power is fortune, good luck, because according to the medieval concept, the wheel of fortune is turning around, and whoever is up in one moment will be down in the next moment. So you have to fight fortune somehow to keep your power. And fortune is represented in one of Machiavelli's famous texts, The Prince, as a lady. And the lady is tempting you in order to get you under her control. And prudence is your power, male power, which will help you to get over the temptation and get a grip on her, actually. So that's the fight that Machiavelli presents. Fortune as the tempting of the prince, and prudence as the way to overcome that temptation. And this is a moment when power, the most important thing to have for the prince, is separated from morals, from the virtues, actually, because Machiavelli reinterprets virtue, and he claims virtu, the Italian term virtu, means simply the ability to act. It's the potential of the prince. So it has got nothing of the moral dimension to it, and nothing, in fact, of the common good dimension of it. It's more like the use of power that is required from the political agent, and this way the Christian tradition, as well as the Greco-Roman tradition of talking about prudence in the context of virtues is replaced by a politicized concept of prudence, a practical political understanding of it as a utility function of the agent. And finally, in this historical overview, I would like to mention Burke, because it was Burke who brought back into the discussion prudence. Edmund Burke, the late 18th century British statesman as well as a political thinker who reflected on the French Revolution, claimed that whenever individual people or the general multitude, as he called the swinish multitude, actually, gets impassioned by rage or frenzy, that causes very difficult situations in the political life, and his example is the French Revolution. He claims that it's the result of human passions that were left uncontrolled, and he proposes to reintroduce concepts like prudence, deliberation, and foresight in order to get back the control from these passionate multitudes. And how do the two concepts come together? These are the moments where my talk concentrates. How do they relate to each other? Is prudence an opposite to natural law, or do they somehow get together? And here again I refer to Gadamer, who claims that in fact prudence looks like only referring to the present moment, but that's not the case. There is a further dimension of it, which he calls the moral hexis, as was called earlier, the appetite in us, the right appetite, which addresses the telos, the aim of one's life. And that's the important dimension of prudence, where in fact it points at natural law, because this is the universal dimension of our individual life. In our individual life, we strive to achieve the good, and the good itself is something that is beyond our reach, but which we strive for, and that good is a normative dimension of our life, and that's defined by natural law. However, the problem with these sorts of abstract norms like the good, as I mentioned earlier, the difficulty or the temptation here is to get too far away on that way, and that means that we will become doctrinaire or dogmatic as thinkers. What does that mean? That we try to understand the present moment under general or universal terms, which will not pay enough attention to the details of the case. And therefore, our judgment will not be nuanced enough, and therefore we will miss the target, we will not hit it. and therefore there is a medium, something which helps us to get from the particular case to the general norm, and that's the historical tradition of the community. And Gadamer claims that already Aristotle was someone who tried to show that constant reference to nature, naturalness, and natural law does not do the work of argumentation. What you have to rely is, in fact, the concrete historical tradition of your community. That's the way that you can reach the general norms. And let me have this example taken from the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. This is an 18th century term or document, and the terms that are used in it are still referring back to the classical discourse. In what sense? We see two sides that are presented in the Declaration. On the one side, there are those natural rights, which the document claims are self-evident truths, that we are born with certain unalienable rights and so on and so on. But that's only one part of the game. And if you look at the text, very soon there is a counterbalance. It says that prudence will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, which means that in fact the founding fathers themselves were aware of the difficulties or the risks of their action, and in this way they presented both sides of the coin. On the one side, those self-evident truths that belong to what they claimed was the natural rights of the human being. On the other side, however, they refer to prudence, which dictates how governments should be dealt with, the more so if they are long-established governments. So how can these two sides be kept in balance? How to reconcile prudence, which is about the right judgment of a particular case in the present moment, with natural law, which guides us with the help of general standards, universal standards. I think that the way to understand is to historicize natural law in the sense of understanding the component of law which is there in natural law as it was conceptualized in the concept of the common law system, as opposed to the Roman law system. What's the difference in the one, and why should I suggest to understand natural law as a common law structure and not as a Roman law system? In Roman law, we have got abstract legal concepts which will direct our discussions, although I refer to the fact that Roman legal science wanted to solve individual problems. But in order to be just or to be equitable, what you are required to do is to give general standards, universal standards, principles that can be used for any cases in order to avoid bias and prejudice. So that's the structure. We have got abstract ideas, standards, norms, and we try to apply to the individual case all of those. Whereas in the common law system, what we have got is precedents, earlier decisions of courts in individual particular cases. And from these precedents, the legal profession built up immemorial customs. These are constructions of the legal scholars, but on the basis of precedents of individual real-life cases. And this way, it is based on empirical knowledge, on practical knowledge. And that's why I claim that we have to understand natural law as a common law system, because it's the natural law of human beings in particular situations. So my claim is, if we understand natural law as a common law system, then prudence is crucial for us, because it's practical wisdom or prudence which will help us to find the right solution according to the precedents, to the customs of our community. And that's where conservatism comes into the picture. What is a tradition for the conservative framework? A tradition is an established practice, a reservoir of social knowledge, as defined by Roger Scruton. He is actually using this expression to explain classical music, but now I use that term for this legal political dimension. I claim that, in fact, what is required for a good decision in a political or legal situation is to rely on established practice, on this reservoir of social knowledge, on tradition. You don't have to rely, you should not rely simply on abstract terms which are brought to light by your own reason. That's hubris, that's a sin actually. What you need to know is the tradition, the way that earlier generations made their judgments in similar situations. And with the help of that, you will be able to handle your own case. So, in fact, what we have got here is a logical sequence starting out from conservatism, which is based on tradition, and that tradition helps us to make sense of natural law. That's my claim, or that leads to natural law. So from the tradition of the community, we can step to the level of abstraction that is natural law. There, one exception needs to be mentioned, that there are conservatives who do not accept the concept of natural law. Like Michael Oakeshott, he did not accept the validity of the term. He did not think that there is this need for this normative dimension beyond the tradition. There is nothing beyond, he claimed. And the final problem for me, and I know that I am over my time, but this is still a very important aspect. What if the tradition leads us astray? If the tradition is a deadlock, actually, how can I decide in my own situation, my own problem, if I cannot rely on the tradition, because tradition is turns out to be a deadlock? Here I refer to Alasdair MacIntyre and his writings on natural law, because MacIntyre's critics claim that his reliance of rationality made tradition something which is relativistic, and which means that in fact he can arrive to a denial of natural law if he overemphasizes tradition. And MacIntyre says that, well, that's not the case. Why not? Because all traditions can and should be judged to the world itself. That's his way of formulating it. MacIntyre finds that the world itself provides the criterion for testing our rationality. So interestingly, while earlier I said that tradition will lead us to natural law, now what I say is, an opposite logical connection. Here I say that whenever tradition is corrupted, you have to fix it, and that's of course only in inverted commas. You fix the tradition by reference to natural law. So there is this dimension of natural law that you can use it to fix your own community's tradition. And here I refer to the concept of achievements in the basic law of Hungary. The concept of achievements is referred to 3 times in the basic law, and the function of it is to separate those parts of the tradition which are honorable and which should be preserved from those ones which should be forgotten and should be criticized, in fact. So there is a way that we who are inheritors of this tradition can judge what is ready to survive from it and what should be taken out or taken as non-valid anymore. And the achievements are those parts which should be preserved. That's the idea. So not all the tradition, in fact, you cannot preserve everything from a tradition. So there is a natural movement of filtering the tradition, an unconscious one of adoption to the new situations. But the point is that you can do it consciously as well. You have to be critical to your own tradition and see what is to be preserved from it and what should be reformed, as Edmund Burke suggested earlier. So that's my final point, and let me summarize what I try to say. I try to present politics as a sea which is difficult to sail, and which therefore requires virtues beyond our own intellectual capacities. And the virtue of practical wisdom is crucial, according to this tradition of the Cardinal Virtues, because it helps to formulate the right rectitude, to be able to select the best options for the right aim of your life. And the question is, how can we decide what is the right way, which is the right solution in a particular case? And I said that practical wisdom will lead you back to the tradition of your community. And I also asked what happens if your community, if one of the, or other parts of your community's tradition is bankrupted, if they lost their way. Well, you apply there the standard of natural law, which you can find by way of tracing back the law of precedents and try to use it for your own particular case. So that's the idea, and I'm looking forward to questions and comments. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much for this lecture, and I like to ask questions. Radek, do you want to ask questions?
Hello, of course, speaking. Hello, Ferenc. We met times at the Vandenberg meeting, so nice to see you.
Yes, nice to see you.
Thanks very much for presentation, highly interesting. However, I've got 2 questions to you, or maybe a comment and a question. Do I understand you correctly when you discussed the concept of natural law, presenting it as a kind of a ocean or slow river, which might be, which some ideas, concepts which are submerged in that river might be changed under the time which flies. And in that context, I see that the idea of prudence as a virtue, as you define it, it might be also change in time, just because of some outside influence, that because of a different learning practice, also because of, as you say, different possibilities for the imitation, it might be change. So, of course, I see a lot of the, in what you presented, a lot of the British or English conservative tradition, which is not submerged in a one point, but it's more about the slowing down the process of modernization. But still, I've got a problem if the natural law, in what you say, is what's understood in the classical terms. And turning to the second point, could you elaborate a little bit on the concept of human dignity? Because at the beginning of your presentation, you made it puzzled me a little bit when you made a comment that as it's not the right answer, there is no right answer for it. It cannot be the basis for the human rights concept. And as far as I am learned, that idea is the basis for the human. I mean, human dignity is the basis for human rights concept. And of course, it has been questioned with the Charter of Fundamental Rights in the European Union. But it's a different story. It's a fresh issue and not examined properly. So those two issues, if you could develop, I would be really impressed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for both. I will start with the second one because it's easier. I might have expressed myself perhaps a bit vaguely, and that's why it was not clear. But my point was that it's not that human dignity cannot function as the foundation of the human rights idea. My point was that human dignity cannot be conceptualized without natural law. That's my argument.
Okay.
And therefore, if you say that, well, I try to have as my foundation human dignity instead of natural law, you did not solve the problem, because with the one you will bring in the other. As for the first question, the historical change, I think that's a more tricky one, and indeed you have a point here, because of course the basic issue about natural law is that it's not on the level of positive law, which is changing, but it's on the level where it should not change actually. But and therefore it should not be conceptualized as a historically changing concept. While with prudence, I don't see that problem, because prudence should change with every person, because it's you know, personalized. It's a virtue. It's an embodied form of knowledge. So you have to. It has to transform in order to be used to apply to the individual that will use it. But with natural law, it's more difficult, because it's the claim itself is that it's a generalized notion. So it's not something that is made by human beings, but it's something that is there, that exists without the influence of history. But I think that the way to defend the point is to understand this historicization is that even if we accept that on its own, taken out from our perspective, it's never changing. Whenever we look at it from our own perspective, for our own purposes, it will certainly become historicized. We have to, in other words, we have to apply the universal standard for our particular case, and at the moment that we try to apply it for that case, it will become historicized. So how do you find this?
Right, thank you.
Yes, Professor Hörcher, I've got a question. You refer to virtues as forms of embodied knowledge and the effects of partly unconscious learning process. So I got rather interested in quote, well, not a quote, but the points of view presented by Cicero, and the fact that prudence, in his view, consists of memory, intelligence, and foresight. So I suppose in this case, memory equals knowledge. But does the knowledge mean here the experience of how exactly one acts in a particular situation in a way that is good for this person? And if so, does it not eliminate the possibility of a person who does not have that knowledge being prudent? So I mean, for instance, the example of children, and I'm asking because we sometimes attribute the virtue of prudence to a child, despite the fact that they don't have much life knowledge, and in fact they rather generalize and devise ways to act in various situations based on their prior experiences. So does the knowledge, is the knowledge of how to act exactly in a particular situation a condition under which one can be prudent? I suppose that's the point. That's my point here. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's quite a relevant one. I would answer, however, in a strong way, claiming that, well, for Cicero, actually no one can be prudent without the life experience itself. That's the unfortunate fact of human life, that you need to learn from your own experience as well. It cannot be left out. You cannot learn it from the history books. You need to experience it on your own. And of course, there are differences between young people's adaptation and ways of solving their own problems. But that wouldn't be prudence in this reading. It would be cunning or brightness or good judgment, but not yet prudence, which has this dimension of past experience.
Thank you.
Tomek.
Thank you. I would like to ask how conservatives should or could prudently criticize the abuse of the idea of human rights from the standpoint of natural law. Because on the one hand, it's hard and I think imprudent today to say we reject human rights. But on the other hand, human rights are very often used as an argument for introduction or implementation the leftist ideology. So how to prudently criticize such argumentation?
Well, thank you, Thomas. I think you answered your question, actually, because the way you described it was already the answer to it. Because certainly the leftist who would do that would not describe his or her activity the way that you described it. So in fact, what you did was describing it from a conservative perspective, pointing out that what he or she is doing is making use of human rights for political purposes instead of using it for its own original purpose of excluding inhuman behavior like that was experienced in the Second World War. So in fact, politicizing it is the way. What we have to point out is that politicizing human rights is in fact downgrading it. It will lose its power if you use it for that purposes, and also it distorts its meaning when we don't use it for the original purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Maybe to ask the question, Professor? maybe my question, how to do just decision, because we have universal standards, and for example the judge has a positive law, and what should he do, or he or she do, when he see that positive law is not according to natural law, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. Very important question, and we saw it in the Nuremberg case that it was also a very actual political problem. And I think that there are two ways to get out of that. One way was the one that was relied, but that was used by the American influences, i.e., to take natural law as something that is directly applicable. And that's what they said, that well, in certain cases, in certain states of affairs, it's obvious, as we saw in the Declaration of Independence, that there are certain things that are obvious for everyone. And that's the American approach, that you can apply natural law by the way of actually common sense. That human beings are rational beings, and therefore they have got ideas in common, because all of them are human beings, and as such they have those. And these common things, and natural law is in fact somehow built into our character, our way of thinking, and that's why it's directly applicable. That's one way of solving it. Lawyers will have problems with that, because then what is the need for positive law if you can directly apply natural law? And therefore it can only be used in exceptional cases, and so on and so on. The other solution, I think it's perhaps a bit more legalistic, and that's the way that the common law uses. It says that in certain cases the regulations of the common law cannot be applied, and what's to be done there? Then you refer to equity. So there is a special procedure for certain cases which cannot be dealt with on the basis of the positive law. And that has its own procedure. That's the advantage of this solution to the American, compared to the American one, that here there is a procedural element to it, how to decide on the basis of equity, which means that how to be just even if there is no positive law background to it. And that's the British common law way of dealing with situations like that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anybody else? I think that we are approaching to the end of our meeting, today's meeting. I'd like to thank you, Professor, for this lecture. And I think that for a lawyer, it's a very important thing to know something a bit about natural law, about prudence, because only in that situation one can be a good lawyer.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you for you all for participating in this meeting. And I think that this lecture and this meeting can be also a foundation for Polish-Hungarian friendship.
Of course, it should be. It's not a foundation, because there are, of course, precedents, so we can rely on that tradition and go on with it.
Thank you very much once more.
Development rather than the foundation, because there's a lot of exchange between Polish and Hungarian lawyers. So
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Thank you very much, and I hope that we will see one day in reality.
I'm sure that we do.
We can make a trip from here to Hungary.
That would be nice. We are happy to welcome you in Budapest.
Thank you very much once more.
Thank you, Andrzej. Thank you, Tomat. Thank you, everyone, for your presence and interest in my talk.
Thank you, Ferenc.
Thank you.
Good night.
Nice to see you. Thank you. Bye.